Have you ever prayed for something and it didn't come to pass in your life, and you wondered, well, God, were you really in favor of me having that? Was that something that came from you, or was I just coveting after what someone else had? Today, we're going to talk on our broadcast of Wisdom for Living. We're going to talk about getting set free from covetousness, an enemy of prosperity.
Welcome to Wisdom for Living with Greg Mohr. Join with Greg as he shares truth from the Word of God that will help you grow in wisdom and successfully navigate a balanced life with family, marriage, finances, and relationships. And now, here's Greg.
I want to welcome you to today's broadcast of Wisdom for Living. My name is Greg Mohr with Greg Mohr Ministries. We've been talking about enemies of prosperity. 3 John 2 says, "Beloved, I wish above all things that you prosper and be in health, even as your soul prospers." So it's God's will for us to prosper. It's God's will for us to have blessing. But in years of ministry experience, I've discovered that people don't really have the right relationship with money. That's one of the reasons they're really not prospering consistently. And the goal of this series is that we've been talking about for these last several broadcasts is to help you develop the right relationship with money by running the enemies off of your land, the land of your heart, that is keeping you from prospering. It's like my good friend Andrew Womack says, where the enemy, don't let the enemy eat your lunch and pop the bag. What does he mean when he says that? Don't give the enemy place in your life. And, it's one thing for us to get a hold of a principle in the Word and then just go apply it like we push a button or pull a lever. But what's really significant is that we understand in our hearts why this is important, that we do it from the right motive of heart, and that we really receive the blessings that God has for us. So we're going to have a great time running another enemy off today. But let me share a funny with you before we get started. So this is from a little girl. She asked her, she was sitting at the dinner table, looking up and asking her dad one day. She said, "Dad, you're the boss, right?" Her father was very pleased by this and replied, yes, sweetheart, I'm the boss, the head of this house." Then the little girl continued, "That's because Mommy put you in charge, right?" Yeah. And I have to share another one with you here. It's called New and Improved. So the little girl was sitting in her grandfather's lap as he read her a story. From time to time, she would take her eyes off the book, reach up, and touch his wrinkled cheek. By and by, she was alternatively stroking her own cheek and then his again. Finally, she spoke and she said, "Granddaddy, did God make you?" "Yes, sweetheart," he answered. "God made me a long time ago." "Oh," she said. "Well then, Granddaddy, did God make me too?" "Oh, yes, sweetheart," he assured her. "God made you just a little while ago." "Oh," she said, feeling her face and his face again. Then she observed, "God's getting better at it now, isn't he, Daddy?" Granddaddy. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, he's doing a better job. Okay, so we're talking about the enemies of prosperity, and we've already dealt with a number of these enemies. The 4 enemies we've dealt with so far is ignorance about the purpose of prosperity. Then the second one was a poverty mentality, a poverty spirit. is an enemy we've got to drive out, where we see our lives through the screen or through the glasses of there's not enough. And then blindness, another enemy is blindness of the Father's care for us. Man, God lives by 1 Timothy 5:8 also, and that is that He is your Father. You're His own. He's not an infidel. He will take care of you. Man, look at the birds. Praise God. Look at the birds, because your Father, they don't have jobs or savings accounts, but your Father takes care of them. And then in the last lesson we talked about fear. Perfect love casts out fear. When you understand that you're loved perfectly, then fear is not going to be a hindrance. And trust in God is the answer. Trust in God. He is your shield. God is your shield from lack. God's your shield from poverty. And He's your exceeding great reward. So the next hindrance, or the next enemy to prosperity that we want to talk about, is covetousness. It's just another way to say greed. Covetousness is the biblical term, but it's just greed. Exodus 20 and verse 17 says, "You shall not covet your neighbor's house, your neighbor's wife, his ox, his donkey, his Lexus, or anything else that is your neighbor's." To be covetous means to long for or set the heart on or lust after, means to plunder by fraudulence or extortion or unjust gain. In Jeremiah 6, I want to read some verses here, and then I'm going to share some stories with you about the people who had the wrong idea about prosperity, and they allowed covetousness, their heart to be filled with covetousness, and they didn't receive what God had for them. So Jeremiah 6 and verse 12, he said, "And their houses will be turned over to others, fields and wives together, for I will stretch out my hand against the inhabitants of the land, because from the least of them even to the greatest of them everyone is given to covetousness. And from the prophet even to the priest everyone deals falsely." Wow. What does that share? What does that tell us? That greed and covetousness, first of all, it brings opposition from God. Just like God said, I resist the proud and give grace to the humble. So pride brings resistance from God, and covetousness brings opposition from God. God's not going to hurt you, but He's not in favor. He's not flowing with you. He's not working with you when you yield to covetousness. He's not going to bring to pass the things that you're trying to get through covetousness. And then it says it brings opposition from God, but also sets the heart toward dealing falsely with others. In Luke chapter 12 and verse 15, it says, "He said to them," this is Jesus talking, "Take heed and beware of covetousness, for one's life doesn't consist in the abundance of things he possesses." And then he's given a parable after this, and he said, "The ground of a certain rich man yielded plentifully, and he thought within himself, saying, What shall I do, since I have no room to store my crops? So he said, I will do this, I will pull down my barns, build greater, and there I will store all my crops and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have many goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, Fool, this night your soul will be required of you. Then whose will those things be which you've provided? So is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God." So this man was covetous. He was greedy. He had a plan to just build bigger barns and bring in more things, and he found security in that, rather than he hadn't listened to the enemies of prosperity. He hadn't listened to this broadcast. He didn't understand the purpose of prosperity was to share with others and bless others. And in other words, covetousness, it sets up your heart to deal falsely with others, but then it also causes deception. And in Colossians 3 and verse 5 says, covetousness is idolatry. Wow. I don't know about you, but I'm not interested in getting into idolatry. And I've dealt with people before, and again, my wife and I, we pastored for several years, 27 years actually, and 3 in one place in Houston, Texas, and then 24 years in North Texas. And we dealt with people that they would get hold of a principle from the Word. They would hear about a principle from the Word, and they would try to apply it, but they do it from a heart that's filled with covetousness, and it just doesn't work. I had a guy come to me one time, and this was in our church in Houston, and he came and asked, he said, now, Pastor, he said, I've heard this famous teacher on the radio say that you can have whatever you say. And so my wife and I need a new car, and I want you to agree with me for a new car. And I totally agreed that they needed a new car. I mean, his car was a bomb. It leaked oil. Literally, it would leak about a pint of oil or a big puddle in the parking lot every time they came. It had the headliner down in it. It smoked. If you got behind it, you'd push this big black puff of smoke. I mean, it was rusted out. This thing was just a bomb. And I was thinking to myself, yeah, I'm not going to just agree with him in prayer about this for a new car, but we're going to receive an offering for him to get a new car, and then we're going to nuke the old one. We're going to send that thing into oblivion. And anyway, so I'm about to agree with him in prayer, and he says no, and then we're going to receive an offering probably that night or the next week. We're going to receive an offering for him to get him a new car or a newer car. And so I started to agree with him in prayer, and he said, now wait a minute, Pastor, I've heard this teacher, he also said you can have what you say, and you need to be specific when you pray. And so I want you to agree with me for a brand new cherry apple red Corvette. And I pulled my hand, I said, away from him, I said, what? I said, how many does that Corvette seat? He said, well, 2. And I said, well, you've got you and your wife who's pregnant and about to have your second child. You've got an 11-year-old son. And I said, okay, and you're wanting me to agree with you for a Corvette. And I said, are you going to put the new baby in the trunk? Are you going to tie the 11-year-old on the top? I said, or are you going to just let your wife drive the bomb and you're going to drive the Corvette? I said, no, you selfish, covetous thing. I'm not going to agree with you for that. You don't need a Corvette. You couldn't even afford the insurance payment on it or the payments on it anyway. But I said, I'll agree with you for a minivan or an SUV or, whatever, a van or something, a station wagon. I don't care. Even if it's as long as you can seat 4 people, I'll agree with. And he said, he got mad. No, he said, God told me I'm supposed to I can have what I say, and I'm supposed to believe him for a cherry apple red Corvette. I said, I'm not agreeing with you, selfish, covetous thing, you. I said, God's not going to answer that prayer. God's not going to give you something that's just, your flesh is coveting after, that's not going to minister to the needs of your family. I'm not agreeing with you on that. And he left. He left the church. He got mad. And they left. And it was like, we were going to receive an offering for him. He was going to get a car. A newer car. Wouldn't have been a brand new, and it certainly wouldn't have been a Corvette. So it's like, listen, God wants you to be blessed, but do you understand covetousness and greed and lust in that young man's heart is what stopped him from the prosperity that God had for him? We were going to help him get a car. But his covetousness stopped him from that. And listen, greed and covetousness is an enemy of prosperity. And we've already read in Jeremiah, God opposes, just like he opposes the proud. He's not mad at us and he's not hurting us, but he's not going to help us receive a promise in an unrighteous method. The end doesn't justify the means. Just because God could even have put a godly desire in your heart, but if you're coveting after something, that's not the Lord. That's not his way. I had another guy come to me, and this is crazy, but he said, "Now, Pastor, I want you to know God has called me to go into ministry full time." And, I questioned it because he really hadn't had that much experience yet. And I knew, he would probably hit his head against the wall. But I didn't discourage him, and I just listened to him. And he said, "And I want you to agree with me. Now, my family, I've got 3 children, and we're going to homeschool them. And so we need an RV to travel." And I said, "Well, I can agree with you about that. And if God's really put this in your heart, he can bring it to pass." But then he said, "Now, what I want you to agree with me about is my neighbor has an RV that he never uses. I rarely see him get it out." He said, "I want you to agree with me that God's going to touch his heart and give me his RV." And I'm about to pray with him. And I pulled my hand back. I said, "I can't agree with you about that." I said, is that man, has he got his RV for sale?" And he said, "Well, no, but he's not using it." I said, "That's none of your business." I said, "The Lord isn't, listen, God's able to get you an RV if that's part of his plan for your life. God's able to get you an RV without taking an RV away from someone else. His blessing in your life is not going to be at the expense of someone else. You're not. That's you. Look, if you want me to agree with you, I can agree with you. But you're lusting, you're coveting after your neighbor's RV. God said He opposes that. In fact, Colossians 3 verse 5 says, covetousness, coveting for your neighbor's RV or a Corvette that isn't going to meet the needs of your family, it's idolatry. Guys, let me tell you something. Idolatry is not a good thing, and God's not involved in it. And that's why some people, I've just given you a couple of examples, that's why some people are not blessed. That's why some people are not walking in the fullness of prosperity, because they haven't dealt with covetousness and greed in their heart. Their flesh is just leading them. They're not being led by the Lord. And God's blessing's not on that. He's not blessing that. James chapter 4, verse 1 said, "Where do wars and fights come from among you? Do they not come from your own desires or lust for pleasures that war in your members. You lust and do not have. You murder and covet and cannot obtain. You fight and war, yet you do not have, because you do not ask. Yet you ask and do not receive, because you ask amiss that you may spend it on your own pleasures. Listen, he said, you lust and do not have. You covet and can't obtain. What is he saying? I'm telling you that the thing that's keeping you from obtaining the promises that I've ordained that you have is covetousness in your heart. You can't, you listen, he's saying, look, trust me, look to me, ask me. Don't covet after what someone else has. He said, you lust or covet, you do not have. See, whatever you're lusting or coveting for, it has you. You don't have it. Even if you got it, it would have you. You wouldn't have it. Whatever we covet and lust for, we're never able to possess. Now, it's all right to ask God for provision and possessions that He's put in your heart, as long as you're looking to God and not to men. Don't trust in men. Even if somebody in your life blesses you sometime financially, don't become codependent upon that person to continue to bless you. You just need to be, anytime prosperity comes my way, it just makes me thankful. And if you want to overcome covetousness, it's simply contentment that helps you to do that. Philippians 4, and contentment isn't being satisfied with not having enough, but contentment is being thankful for what God has provided. Philippians 4, 11 and 12, Paul said, I've learned in whatever state I am, Texas or Colorado or Kentucky or, I'm teasing. But he said, I've learned in whatever state I am to be content, whether I'm abased or whether I abound. And contentment is a learned behavior or attitude. And it's an attitude that can operate in us irrespective of our present circumstance or financial condition. Paul did not allow his circumstance or lack of support from others to redirect his trust or shape his attitude. And it's a very interesting definition of contentment. It means to raise a barrier to ward off or protect like a shield. And so contentment is a barrier or shield to ward off covetousness in our lives. My trust in God's care and provision for me, especially in the face of lack, is my protection from covetousness. Contentment involves me looking to God and saying, no matter what I'm going through, Father, you're going to help me. You're going to get me through. And 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 5 says that useless wranglings of men of corrupt minds, destitute of the truth, who suppose that godliness is a means of gain, from such withdraw yourself. Now godliness with contentment is great gain. So it's a wrong attitude to get it in your mind that you can judge your spiritual maturity by your financial status. The financial status or gain is never the standard or measurement of godliness in someone's life. And there are lots of temptations that come to people who have money in the cloak of, using financial gain to accomplish spiritual purposes, like, just think how much more I could give to the church and missions and the work of God if I got involved with this deal. Or, it won't bother God if I tell a little white lie to win this new client. Besides, He knows my tithe will be larger. That's deception, and it's covetousness. Hebrews 13, verse 5. Let your conduct be without covetousness, knowing that He Himself has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. We quote that verse out of context many times. What's He saying? When you and I are content, with what God has given us, He's not going to leave us there. He's not going to leave us in a place of lack. He's not going to leave us in a place of want. The Lord is our shepherd. I shall not want. You don't need to fear lack, and we don't need to yield to covetousness to meet our needs. I just bless you today and thank God for you, and I speak freedom from the enemy of covetousness in your life.
Today's teaching, Enemies of Prosperity, is available in a 5-part CD or DVD album, or on a USB flash drive containing both audio and video. Go to gregmohr.com and order your copy today.
I want to encourage you to go online to gregmohr.com, and with the order this week of the Enemies of Prosperity, either CD, DVD, or USB, we're going to send you a free copy of my book called A Prosperous Soul. God wants us to prosper and be in health, even as our souls prosper. This book will help you learn how to develop the right attitude toward prosperity in your life. God bless you.
Today, when you order Enemies of Prosperity in either CD, DVD, or USB, Pastor Greg will give you a free copy of his book, A Prosperous Soul. This powerful book contains biblical truths that will help you discover the key to a life of health and prosperity. Go to gregmohr.com and get your free copy of A Prosperous Soul when you order Enemies of Prosperity today. If you've been blessed by today's teaching, we would like you to consider partnering with Greg Mohr Ministries. Your partnership will help expand this broadcast around the world to give people the opportunity to grow in wisdom, Christ-likeness, and grace. Go to gregmohr.com and become a partner today. Remember, you can order resources or partner with our ministry at gregmohr.com or by writing to us at P.O. Box 7702, Woodland Park, Colorado 80863. We look forward to hearing from you today. Join us again tomorrow for more Wisdom for Living.
Listen, God's got provision for you, but you have to go where He's leading you to go. And there are some stubborn, impulsive, and broke Christians who are sitting at the wrong brook, hanging around the wrong crowd because they've been emotion-led and flesh-led, and they're not receiving the fullness of God's provision for their lives. So here's an oxymoron: is biblical prosperity and impulsiveness in finances. That's a moronic ox. They don't work. It's just like oil and water. It doesn't mix. We need to learn to wait on God and not follow whatever whim hits your flesh.
That's tomorrow on Wisdom for Living.